A sick pit bull was about to be euthanized when a little girl approached it and did something that shocked her parents. The Harvey family's move to Reno, Nevada, was supposed to be a fresh start. Claire Harvey had chosen this suburb hoping it would bring a sense of calm, a stark contrast to the bustling city life they left behind. Yet, as weeks turned into months, the change seemed to highlight the very cracks they were trying to mend. Lime, their 6-year-old daughter, had always been a quiet child. But since the move, her silence felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on the household. She spent hours drawing alone in her room, sketching scenes of faraway places she'd never been, filling the margins with small, sad creatures with big, pleading eyes. At school, she drifted on the edges of groups, never quite stepping into the circle of chatter and laughter. The teachers described her as quiet, reserved, or sensitive, words that Claire knew were their gentle way of saying different. In the neighborhood, her isolation was more pronounced. The other children's laughter would spill into their backyard from the nearby park, but Lime stayed indoors, preferring the company of her colored pencils to the daunting prospect of introducing herself. Claire watched her daughter with growing concern. At the kitchen table, Lime would sit in silence, her fork idly pushing peas across her plate while her parents exchanged quiet glances. Colin, pragmatic and protective, thought time would heal the wounds of change. Claire, however, felt the weight of Lime's solitude as though it were her own. One evening, after Lime had gone to bed, Claire finally spoke about what had been lingering in her heart. "She's lonely, Colin. She's fading in front of us." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of her worry. Colin sighed and leaned back in his chair. "She's adjusting. Moving is hard for kids. She'll figure it out. But what if she doesn't?" Claire pressed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Dr. Mendez said she needs something, or someone, to help her feel connected. Colin tilted his head, sensing where this was going. "A dog?" "Yes, a dog," Claire said, her voice firmer now. "She needs a companion. Someone who won't judge her, or expect her to fit in right away. Someone she can love without fear." Colin hesitated. A dog is a big responsibility. What if it doesn't help? Claire's gaze softened. What if it does? The next Saturday, the family drove to the local animal shelter. Lime sat in the back seat, her small hands clutching her sketchpad as though it were a shield. She had overheard snippets of her parents' conversation the night before, and though she didn't fully understand their concern, the idea of meeting a dog stirred something inside her, a cautious curiosity. As the Harvey family stepped into the dim, echoing hallways of the animal shelter, Lime's small hand clutched Claire's tightly. Her wide eyes darted around, drinking in the sight of cages upon cages filled with all kinds of dogs, some barking, some restless, but many quiet, lying in shadowed corners, waiting. The place had a heaviness to it, a stillness that seemed to soak into every corner. Lime had never been in a place like this before, and though she was quiet, there was a curiosity, a wonder even, that Claire noticed in her daughter's gaze. The two walked slowly, taking in the rows of cages. Lime's gaze moved from one dog to another, but nothing seemed to draw her in. Nothing yet stirred that flicker of joy Claire had hoped for. Most of the dogs wagged their tails, jumped or barked for attention, but then, as they approached a cage near the end of the row, Lime's steps faltered. In the cage lay a pit bull, thin and sickly, his fur patchy and dull, his body curled tight as though trying to make himself disappear into the shadows. He didn't move, didn't even raise his head to acknowledge the visitors. His eyes, barely visible beneath drooping lids, were cloudy with fatigue and pain. There was a hollow, almost resigned look about him, as though he'd already given up. Lime stopped, her eyes fixated on the quiet creature who didn't even have the strength to look back. She felt something deep in her chest, a tug, a pang. Without taking her eyes off the dog, she whispered, "Mom." Claire knelt down beside her, glancing at the pit bull and then back at Lime. "Sweetheart, this one's very sick," she murmured, her voice a mixture of softness and caution. He might not be able to live for very long. He's been here a while. Some animals, they don't find homes." But Lime didn't seem to hear. Her small hand reached out, resting on the bars of the cage. "He's sad, Mom," she said quietly, and Claire's heart clenched at the simple words. She felt the weight of her daughter's gaze, saw the understanding in those young eyes, and for a moment Claire was lost for what to say. Before Claire could find the words to explain, they heard footsteps. A shelter worker, a woman named Miss Jenkins, approached with a weary expression, her hand holding a worn, fraying leash. She stopped in front of the cage, keys jingling in her other hand. Miss Jenkins avoided looking directly at Lime, as though the small figure watching her might make what she was about to do even harder. "All right, buddy," Miss Jenkins murmured to the dog, her voice almost breaking as she reached for the cage lock. She avoided Lime's gaze, focused instead on the task, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to open the door. Just then, Lime's voice cut through the silence. "No, please, don't!" she cried, her voice small but fierce, filled with a pleading that seemed far too strong for a girl her age. Her words stopped Miss Jenkins mid-motion, and even Claire felt a jolt at the strength in her daughter's voice. Miss Jenkins looked up, surprise and hesitation crossing her face. For a moment, she seemed at a loss, glancing from the pit bull to Lime, her hand still gripping the lock. "He just needs a chance," Lime whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Please, don't let him go." Claire placed a gentle hand on Lime's shoulder. "Honey, sometimes these things happen to help them so they don't suffer. He's been very sick, and it's not easy to take care of a dog like him." But Lime shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the pit bull. "I can help him," she said softly, yet with a determination that surprised both Claire and Miss Jenkins. The shelter worker's gaze softened as she considered Lime's words. She looked again at the dog, lying still and quiet, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. It was rare, so rare, for someone to ask for a dog like him. The shelter was already stretched thin, and Rex, yes, she remembered now, his name was Rex, had been there longer than most. He'd seen family after family pass by, hoping for a home, only to be left alone each time. But here was this little girl, staring at him like he was worth saving, like he mattered. Miss Jenkins took a deep breath, then turned to Claire. "Look, I can't promise he'll recover. He's in rough shape. But if you're willing to take him, he can have a chance. He'll need a lot of care and patience." Claire hesitated, glancing between Lime and Rex. She could see the hope in her daughter's face, a hope that made her own heart ache with worry and protectiveness. She wanted to shield Lime from heartbreak, to spare her from the difficulties that might lie ahead. But how could she deny her daughter this one chance to give and receive love, a love so unconditionally offered? After a long pause, Claire nodded. "All right," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll take him." Claire had already made up her mind, her gaze unwavering as she glanced at Lime, her small hands clinging to her mother's sleeve. Colin could see the tenderness in Claire's eyes as she looked at their daughter. It was a look that spoke of unshakable determination, a mother's silent pledge to do whatever was necessary to see a smile return to her little girl's face. "Colin, you know as well as I do how much this means to Lime," Claire began, her voice low and steady. "It isn't just about bringing home a dog. She's been so lost since we moved here. She needs a friend, someone who can be by her side, who doesn't judge or ask her to change. And I know that Rex could be that friend." Colin ran his hand over his face, sighing as he looked toward the window. Rex wasn't just any pit bull. He was a sickly, fragile creature who would require special care and attention, not to mention the mounting vet bills that were bound to accompany him. They weren't a wealthy family. Colin saw the potential burden, the time, the energy, the cost, and the uncertain outcome if this all went wrong. "Claire, I understand Lime needs a companion," he replied, keeping his tone gentle, though there was a note of caution. "But have you thought this through? Rex, he's not just any dog. He's a pit bull, Claire. What if something goes wrong? What if he isn't the companion we hope he'll be?" But Claire only shook her head, undeterred. "Colin, look at her. She's been so withdrawn since we moved. She hardly talks at school, and here she's barely spoken to a soul." Her voice softened as she placed a hand on Lime's shoulder, feeling the small weight of her daughter's trust. "Just this once. Can't we take a chance on something for her?" Lime's eyes lifted to her father, and though she said nothing, the faint glimmer of hope in her gaze tugged at his heart. It was rare to see such expression in Lime's face, her usual shyness forming a quiet but steadfast plea. There was no questioning the bond she'd already felt with that dog, even after such a brief encounter. To her, Rex was more than a pit bull with a rough past. He was a creature needing kindness, just as she did. Colin's resistance began to wane, though he still hesitated. He knew in his heart that he wanted to see Lime happy, to watch her open up to the world around her. And yet he also felt the lingering weight of responsibility, the pressure of ensuring his family's safety and well-being. Could they truly take on such a commitment? After what felt like an eternity of silent reflection, Colin gave a slow nod, his heart yielding to his daughter's quiet longing and his wife's unwavering hope. "All right," he said softly, his voice resigned yet gentle. "We'll bring him home. But I want us to be careful, Claire. We have to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy." Claire smiled, a light in her eyes as she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Colin," she whispered, her voice brimming with gratitude. "I know it's not easy, but I believe this is the right thing." Miss Jenkins' smile, her eyes softening as she watched Lime move tentatively toward Rex's cage. Rex lay there, his frail body barely moving, yet his eyes lifted with a glimmer of recognition as the family approached. Carefully, Claire helped Lime fasten the leash to Rex's collar, her hands gentle yet steady. Rex's eyes met Lime's, and in that quiet exchange, a trust began to grow, tentative yet unmistakable. As they guided Rex to the car, Colin watched the small but determined girl who held the leash firmly, his heart softening as he realized how much she had longed for this moment. And as the family drove home, with Rex lying quietly in the back seat, Colin couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of calm settling over him. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this choice would lead them all to a brighter tomorrow. The mornings at the Harvey household had taken on a new rhythm since Rex arrived. Lime, once a shadow flitting quietly through their days, was now a child transformed. The first rays of sunlight spilling through her bedroom window would find her already awake, her small hands gently clutching a dog bowl as she hurried to the kitchen. The soft shuffle of her slippers, the clink of kibble falling into the bowl, these were the sounds of healing, both for a little girl and the fragile pit bull that had unexpectedly become the heart of their home. Claire often paused at the doorway to watch, her hands idly resting on the dishcloth she had meant to hang. Lime would kneel beside Rex, her voice a soft murmur as she coaxed the dog to eat. "Come on, Rex, just a little more. You can do it." The dog, still thin and weary, would glance up at her with eyes that had begun to clear, a faint glimmer of trust shining through. Slowly, but surely, he leaned forward, taking the food with a cautious tongue. Lime would grin, her face lighting up in a way Claire hadn't seen in months. Each small victory, a full meal, a wag of Rex's once limp tail, became a celebration. Lime marked them in her notebook, a habit she'd started since Rex arrived. Rex wagged 3 times today. She'd scribble in crooked letters, then rush to show Claire, her excitement bubbling over like spring water. Claire would nod and smile, though sometimes she had to turn away to wipe her eyes. These moments, these tiny bursts of joy, were stitching together the pieces of her daughter's world. But the road to recovery was not smooth. Rex's body bore the scars of neglect and illness, and his fight for health was slow and demanding. Claire found herself making frequent trips to the vet, her car now littered with receipts for medications and special shampoos. Lime would accompany her on these trips, clutching Rex's leash tightly, as though her grip alone could keep him tethered to life. And perhaps it did, Claire thought. Lime's presence seemed to infuse Rex with a quiet determination. His dull fur began to soften and shine, his gaunt frame filled out, and his once tired eyes grew sharp and watchful. At first, Colin had watched from the sidelines, his arms crossed and his brow furrowed. He had been the skeptic, the voice of caution in a house brimming with hope. But even he couldn't ignore the change in his daughter. Lime no longer avoided the children in the neighborhood or recoiled from their chatter. Though she wasn't yet ready to join their games, she stood at the fence now, Rex by her side, her gaze steady instead of fearful. Colin couldn't deny the way her laughter filled their home, breaking through the silence that had hung over it for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in hues of gold and amber, Colin and Claire found themselves sitting by the lake behind their house. Lime and Rex were a lively blur of motion on the shore, the little girl tossing a stick into the water while the dog bounded after it with newfound energy. The water glistened as Rex splashed through it, his powerful legs sending droplets, flying in arcs that caught the fading light. Lime squealed with delight as Rex returned triumphantly, the stick clenched in his teeth. Claire leaned her head against Colin's shoulder. "Look at them," she murmured. "I never thought. I never imagined we'd see her like this." Colin nodded, his throat tightening. "I was wrong," he admitted softly. "About Rex, about all of it. He's good for her." Claire smiled, her fingers curling around his. "He's good for all of us." In the distance, Lime had fallen into the grass, laughing as Rex nudged her with his wet nose. She wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering something that made his tail wag furiously. Watching them, Colin felt a surge of pride, a deep, steady warmth that settled in his chest. This dog, this unlikely savior, had given their family something they hadn't even realized they'd lost, a sense of wholeness, of possibility. The days unfolded like this, each one a little brighter than the last. Rex grew stronger, Lime grew braver, and the bond between them deepened with every shared moment. And though the journey hadn't been without its struggles, the Harveys knew, as they sat by the lake watching their daughter and her dog, that they had made the right choice. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was hope, embodied in a wagging tail and a pair of soulful, grateful eyes. The days with Rex had brought an undeniable shift in the Harvey household, particularly in Lime's spirit. The quiet, withdrawn child who once avoided eye contact now laughed freely, her voice ringing through the backyard like a forgotten melody. Lime's transformation didn't go unnoticed, especially by Edward, a boy her age who lived a few houses down. Edward had seen Lime walking Rex near the edge of the wooded trail behind their homes. Intrigued by the lively pit bull and Lime's brightened demeanor, he worked up the courage to introduce himself one sunny afternoon. Edward was a boisterous boy, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. "Can I pet him?" he asked, standing cautiously a few feet away from Lime and Rex. Lime, clutching the leash, hesitated before nodding. Rex, who had grown stronger with every passing day, wagged his tail in welcome. As Edward's hand met Rex's sleek head, Lime found herself smiling at the boy's easy confidence. From that moment, Edward and Lime became inseparable during playtime, and Rex was the glue binding their newfound friendship. The trio spent long hours chasing each other around the backyard, inventing games only children could dream up. Edward's boisterous energy matched Lime's quiet joy, and their laughter filled the once silent yard. Claire often watched them from the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, marveling at the wonder of childhood friendship and the incredible impact Rex had made. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared Claire's growing warmth toward Rex. A week later, Claire overheard murmurs among the neighbors while picking up groceries. "A pit bull, you say?" one woman whispered, her tone laced with skepticism. "Those dogs are unpredictable. I wouldn't let my kids near one." Another chimed in, "They're dangerous." What were they thinking? It didn't take long for the whispers to reach the ears of Edward's parents. Concerned for their son's safety, they forbade Edward from playing with Rex, citing stories of pit bull attacks they'd read online. When Edward returned home, after a particularly lively afternoon with Lime and Rex, his mother sternly instructed him to stay away from the Harvey house. "Edward, I'm serious. That dog might be fine now, but what happens when it isn't?" "I won't risk your safety," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Edward sulked in silence, missing the warmth of Rex's company and Lime's quiet companionship. The news quickly reached Claire. She, sitting at the kitchen table late one evening, she confessed her growing doubts to Colin. "Maybe they're right," she admitted, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with a finger. "What if Rex does hurt someone? We barely know his history, and Lime would be devastated if anything happened." Colin sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I understand why you're worried, but look at what Rex has done for Lime. She's a different child because of him. If we take him away, what will that do to her?" Claire couldn't argue with Colin's logic, but the weight of the neighbors' judgments pressed heavily on her. After a long silence, she nodded reluctantly. "Maybe we should keep him in the backyard for now," she said softly, the decision settling uneasily in her chest. The next morning, Rex was led to the small enclosure behind their house. Lime stood quietly as Claire locked the gate, her hands trembling slightly. Rex tilted his head, confused but obedient, his dark eyes fixed on Lime. She reached through the bars, stroking his soft fur. "It's just for a little while," Claire whispered, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Lime said nothing but spent the rest of the day sitting on the back steps, watching Rex with a longing that broke Claire's heart. For the first time since Rex had joined their lives, the Harvey home felt heavy with unease. Claire and Colin tried to console themselves with the thought that they were protecting both Rex and the children. But deep down, they wondered if they had made the right choice, or if their fear of what others thought had cost them a piece of the happiness they'd worked so hard to rebuild. The winter sun hung low over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet backyard of the Harvey household. Lime walked home from school with Edward, her small frame dwarfed by the boy's taller, gangly figure. She clutched her school bag tightly, her thoughts lingering on Rex, who she knew was waiting for her behind the house. "Come on, Lime," Edward urged, his voice filled with a boyish eagerness. "Just for a little while. Let's go to the lake. It's been forever since we played there." Lime hesitated, her steps faltering as she glanced toward her house. "I can't," she murmured, almost to herself. "Rex is alone. He's always waiting for me." Edward grinned, leaning down slightly as if his excitement might sway her. "You can go back to him any time. He's not going anywhere, right? It's just the lake. 5 minutes, I promise." Lime's heart wavered. She didn't want to disappoint Edward, the only friend who had managed to gently coax her out of her shy, silent world. His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite her loyalty to Rex, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered, her voice as soft as the wind rustling through the trees. The lake shimmered in the fading light. Lime and Edward chased each other along the banks, their laughter mingling with the sound of rustling leaves. For a moment, Lime felt light, free from the heaviness that had often followed her since the move to Reno. Edward darted close to the water, his sneakers kicking up soft clumps of dirt. "Bet you can't catch me," he taunted, his grin wide as he sped toward the edge. Lime giggled, taking up the challenge, her small feet padding across the damp ground. But then it happened. Edward's foot slipped on a patch of wet grass, his arms flailing wildly as he lost his balance. With a startled cry, he tumbled into the water, the surface swallowing him with a loud splash. Lime stopped in her tracks, her laughter freezing in her throat as terror gripped her chest. "Edward!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the stillness. She ran to the edge, her small hands trembling as she peered into the swirling water. Edward's head bobbed up briefly, his eyes wide with panic, before the current pulled him under again. "Help! Somebody help!" Lime shouted, but the quiet neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, offering no response. Behind the house, Rex's ears perked up at the sound of Lime's desperate cries. His senses sharpened, his heart pounding as though he understood her fear. Instinct took over, and the pit bull threw himself against the metal latch of his enclosure. The first impact rattled the gate, but it didn't budge. Rex growled low in his throat, his body trembling with urgency. Again and again, he lunged at the door, his claws scraping against the hard surface. The latch groaned under his weight, bending slightly with each relentless push. Inside the house, Claire paused mid-task, frowning as she thought she heard something. Was it Lime? Or perhaps Rex? Before she could investigate, a loud crash resounded from the yard. The gate flew open, and Rex bolted toward the lake, his powerful legs propelling him through the yard. He rounded the corner and spotted Lime, her small figure silhouetted against the glow of the water. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she waved frantically toward the center of the lake. "Rex!" she sobbed, falling to her knees as she saw the dog. Her voice cracked with relief, and she pointed toward Edward, who was now barely visible amid the rippling waves. "Please, Rex, help him!" Rex didn't hesitate. With a mighty leap, he plunged into the cold water, his sleek body cutting through the surface with ease. Lime gasped, her breath hitching as she watched her beloved dog swim toward Edward with determination etched into every stroke. Edward's hand broke through the surface, just as Rex reached him. The dog grabbed onto the sleeve of the boy's shirt with his strong jaws, careful not to hurt him. Slowly, with deliberate effort, Rex began to pull Edward toward the shore. By the time Edward's limp body reached the shallows, a cacophony of hurried footsteps and sharp cries echoed from the woods behind. Claire and Colin, followed closely by Edward's parents, burst onto the scene, their faces masks of fear and desperation. Their breaths caught in their throats as they took in the sight of Rex, the pit bull they had doubted, guiding Edward towards solid ground. Edward's father waded into the lake without hesitation, scooping the boy up and cradling him as he stumbled back to shore. His wife was beside him in an instant, her hands trembling as she checked her son's pulse. Claire crouched next to them, dialing emergency services with steady fingers despite the tremor in her voice. Edward coughed weakly, sputtering up water, and his mother let out a sob of relief as she hugged him tightly. In the midst of this frantic relief, Lime's gaze turned sharply toward Rex. The dog stood a few feet away, his body swaying as if drained of every ounce of energy. His breaths came in short, shallow bursts, his legs trembling beneath him. With a quiet whimper, Rex collapsed onto the damp earth. "Dad! Rex!" Lime cried, rushing to his side. Her small hands pressed against his heaving chest, her tears falling freely now. Colin, his face pale with worry, knelt down and gently gathered the dog into his arms. Though Rex was heavier than he appeared, Colin held him as delicately as he would a child. "Let's go," Colin said firmly, his voice thick with urgency. Claire, having finished the call to emergency services, nodded, her hand on Lime's shoulder as they hurried toward the car. Inside the vehicle, the tension was palpable. Lime sat in the back seat, cradling Rex's head in her lap. Her fingers ran through his fur, her voice a soft murmur of encouragement as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You're so brave, Rex," she whispered. "You're the best dog ever. Please don't leave me." Colin's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his foot pressing harder on the gas than usual. His silence spoke volumes, his mind racing with a mixture of guilt and fear. Beside him, Claire fought to hold back her own tears, her heart aching at the sight of Lime's sorrow. Back at the lake, Edward's parents held their son tightly. Their gratitude was unspoken but profound, their gazes fixed on the path the Harveys had taken. A quiet understanding passed between them as they realized the debt they owed to a dog they had once feared. By the time the Harveys arrived at the veterinary hospital, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and red. Lime refused to let go of Rex, even as a team of vet techs approached with a stretcher. As they carried Rex inside, the family lingered in the waiting room, their breaths shallow and hearts heavy. Lime clung to her mother, her tears unabated. Colin paced the room, his jaw tight, every fibre of his being willing Rex to fight just a little longer. A moment later, the doctor emerged, sadly saying, "It's time for the family to say goodbye." Those words hit the Harveys like a thunderbolt. Lime burst into tears, Collins bent down to hug her daughter, and Claire covered her face with her hands to hold back her tears. The day Rex left this world, a deep silence fell over the Harvey household. At the veterinary hospital, Claire and Colin had stood beside their daughter, each with an arm wrapped around her small frame, as Rex took his final breath. The room had been somber, heavy with the weight of goodbye. Claire had held Rex's paw, stroking it gently as she whispered soft words of gratitude for all he had done. Colin, who had once questioned bringing Rex into their lives, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his throat too tight for words. Lime had knelt down, her cheek resting against Rex's head. Through her tears, she murmured a trembling, "Thank you, Rex. You're the best friend I've ever had." Rex's passing left an emptiness that settled in every corner of their home. The mornings felt quieter without the soft pad of paws on the hardwood floor or the happy thump of a wagging tail. Lime's laughter, which had become a regular melody in the house thanks to Rex, was now replaced by quiet moments of reflection. She spent hours drawing pictures of him, sketching his strong frame, his soft eyes, and the way he always seemed to be smiling just for her. Claire knew they needed a way to honor Rex, a way to turn their grief into gratitude. The idea came unexpectedly one evening as she watched Lime placing one of her drawings on the refrigerator. The simple sketch of Rex saving Edward from the lake sparked something in her heart. She turned to Colin, her voice trembling but resolute. "We should hold a memorial for him," she said. "Not just for us, but for everyone who loved him. He deserves that." The next morning, Claire reached out to Edward's parents. Their gratitude for Rex's bravery had been unspoken but palpable since the day he saved their son. As soon as Claire mentioned the idea of a memorial, Edward's mother immediately agreed. "It's the least we can do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That dog was a hero. He saved our boy. We'll help in any way we can." Word of the memorial spread quickly through the neighborhood. On the day of the event, the park near the Harvey home was transformed into a space of quiet reverence. A large photo of Rex, taken during one of his happier days by the lake, stood on an easel adorned with flowers. Neighbors brought bouquets, candles, and handwritten notes, laying them at the base of the photo. Lime stood with her parents, her small hand clutching Claire's tightly as people approached to pay their respects. Edward and his family arrived, his parents offering heartfelt condolences while Edward handed Lime a carefully folded piece of paper. "It's a thank you letter for Rex," he said, his voice wavering. Lime took it with a soft smile, her eyes shimmering with tears. The ceremony began with a few words from Claire, who spoke of Rex's journey from the pitiful, sickly dog they found at the shelter to the courageous protector who had changed their lives forever. Colin followed, his usually steady voice breaking as he recounted how Rex had taught him the meaning of loyalty and love. "He wasn't just a dog," Colin said. "He was family." When it was Lime's turn to speak, the park fell silent. She stepped forward, her small frame trembling but her voice steady. "Rex taught me how to love," she began. "He showed me how to be brave and how to care for someone who needed me. I'll never forget him. He'll always be my best friend." As Lime finished, she placed one of her drawings, a vibrant picture of Rex standing proudly by the lake at the base of his photo. She whispered, "Goodbye, Rex. Thank you for everything." The ceremony ended with a shared moment of quiet reflection. Neighbors wiped their eyes, and even those who had once doubted the wisdom of keeping a pit bull in the neighborhood seemed moved by the legacy Rex had left behind. For Lime, that day marked a turning point. She felt a quiet strength blooming inside her, a resilience Rex had helped her find. As the sun set and the crowd dispersed, she stood with her parents, watching the fading light bathe Rex's photo in a golden glow. She knew she would carry him with her always, in every step she took and every act of kindness she shared. Rex was gone, but his spirit lived on, an enduring reminder of love, bravery, and the power of second chances. And that brings us to the end of this heartwarming story of Rex, a brave, loyal dog who reminded us all of the power of love, compassion, and second chances. His journey from the brink of despair to becoming a hero has touched so many lives, and it's a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness can have the biggest impact. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a pet or an experience that changed your life in a profound way? Maybe a moment where you saw courage, loyalty, or love in its purest form. Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to read them, and so would our amazing community here. And as always, thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Until next time, stay kind, stay compassionate, and remember, the smallest act of love can make a world of difference. See you in the next video.